Something is unsettling about a reflection. We rely on it every day, trust it to show us who we are, what we look like, how we present ourselves to the world. But what if it didn't follow the rules? What if, just once, you caught your reflection moving when you weren't? What if in a fleeting moment it smiled when you didn't? In the small town of Marston, there was an old house that had sat untouched for years. It wasn't abandoned exactly, it just felt forgotten. Locals rarely spoke of it, and no one could quite remember who the last owner was. Some said it was haunted, others said it was cursed. But for Clara, the house was simply home. Clara had inherited it after her grandmother's passing, a house that came with no stories, no warnings, and no secrets. Or so she thought. She had always been a logical person, a realist, someone who didn't believe in things that went bump in the night. But something about this house unsettled her from the very beginning. It wasn't the creaking floorboards or the shadows that flickered on the walls. It was something far subtler, something she couldn't quite place at first. It all started on an evening like any other. Clara had spent the day cleaning out the dusty old rooms, sorting through her grandmother's belongings. By dusk, she was exhausted, her muscles aching from the day's work. As she walked down the hallway toward the bathroom, she passed the large mirror that hung in the corridor, a mirror that had been there since before she was born. That's when she noticed it. For a split second, her reflection lingered after she passed, just a moment too long, as if it were reluctant to let her go. She blinked and looked back at the mirror. Her reflection stared back, just as it should. A chill crept down her spine, but she brushed it off, blaming it on exhaustion. That night, however, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her reflection standing in that mirror, watching her, smiling. But she wasn't smiling, not once, yet in her dreams, her reflection grinned. Days went by, and Clara tried to ignore the feeling, the nagging sense that something was wrong with the house. But the more she tried to shake it, the more she found herself drawn to the mirror. Every time she walked past it, she couldn't resist the urge to glance at her reflection. At first, it was just out of the corner of her eye, a fleeting look, but soon it became more frequent, more deliberate. And each time, it seemed like her reflection was doing something different. It wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it was just a slight twitch at the corner of her mouth, or a shadow of a smile that didn't belong on her face. Other times it was the way her eyes seemed to follow her even when she wasn't standing directly in front of the mirror. It was as though her reflection was watching her, waiting for something. One evening, as she brushed her hair in front of the mirror, she caught a glimpse of something out of place, her lips slightly curved upward in a smile. She stopped, the brush falling from her hand as a wave of nausea washed over her. She wasn't smiling, but her reflection was. The nights that followed were worse. Clara would wake up in the dead of night, feeling like she was being watched. She began to avoid mirrors altogether, afraid of what she might see. She covered the one in the hallway with a sheet, but still, the sensation lingered. The feeling that her reflection was still there, grinning even when she couldn't see it. It wasn't just the mirror in the hallway anymore. The reflection seemed to follow her, appearing in the bathroom, the kitchen window, even the surface of a cup of tea. It was always just for a moment, a flash of teeth, a smile that vanished as soon as she blinked, but it was enough to make her skin crawl. One night, unable to bear it any longer, she decided to confront it. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, willing it to move, to do something. Her own face stared back at her, expressionless. And then it happened. Her reflection smiled. A wide, unnatural grin that stretched from ear to ear, showing far too many teeth. Clara's heart raced as she stumbled back, her body frozen in place, unable to look away. The reflection leaned closer, pressing its hands against the glass, as if it wanted to crawl through and reach her. Desperate, Clara turned to her closest friend Megan for help. Megan had always been more open to the supernatural than Clara, and suggested that the house might be haunted by something attached to the mirror. Clara laughed it off at first, but after what she had experienced, she couldn't completely dismiss the idea. They searched through her grandmother's old belongings, looking for anything that might explain the strange occurrences. Buried in a box in the attic, they found an old journal, one that belonged to Clara's grandmother. In it, she detailed her own experiences with the mirror, the smiling reflection, the way it seemed to act on its own. According to the journal, the mirror had been in the family for generations. It had been passed down through the women of the family, always with the same warning: never trust the reflection. The further they read, the more horrifying the story became. Clara's great-grandmother had once owned the mirror, and she too had written about seeing her reflection smile when she didn't. She had spoken of a legend, an old curse, one that trapped a piece of the owner's soul within the mirror. The reflection was no longer a mere image, but a distorted version of the self, one that grew more malevolent the longer it was ignored. Clara's grandmother had tried to get rid of the mirror many times, but had always found its way back to the house, as if it were drawn to the family. By the end of the journal, the writing had become frantic, almost incoherent. The last entry was the most chilling of all. "I can't keep looking at it, I can't stand its smile, it wants something, it wants me." Megan suggested they destroy the mirror, break the curse once and for all. But Clara was hesitant. There was something about the mirror that made her feel as though it couldn't simply be destroyed, as though it was watching her even now, daring her to try. In the dead of night, they took the mirror outside, ready to smash it to pieces. As Clara raised the hammer, her reflection grinned wider than ever before, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. For a moment, she hesitated, feeling as though she were about to do something terrible, something irreversible, but she couldn't live like this any longer. With a scream, she brought the hammer down on the glass. The mirror shattered, pieces of glass flying in all directions. For a moment, Clara felt a sense of relief, but then she looked down at the shards. Each piece still held her reflection, and in every fragment, her reflection was still smiling. The grin never left her, even as the glass was swept away, even as the house was sold. Wherever Clara went, wherever she caught her reflection, in windows, in water, in the eyes of others, it smiled back at her. She would never be free, because now the reflection wasn't just in the mirror, it was in her. Some say that reflections are just shadows of our souls, harmless images that mimic our every move. But what if they weren't? What if they were something else entirely? Something darker? Next time you catch a glimpse of your reflection, pay close attention. If it ever smiles when you don't, run. Subscribe for more.